Hey guys, it's Bryan.
Hey, it's Nate.
Hey, it's Barry.
And welcome to the Collecti-Bros podcast. On this episode is another episode of, I said episode twice, Is It Worth It? If you guys don't know what that is, that's when we look at a game, or multiple games in this case, and determine several key factors of this game. The graphics, the gameplay, the sound/music, the collectability aspect, and I feel like I forgot one because I'm stupid.
Rolls, brother.
Yeah, it's in there. The gameplay.
Yeah.
Anyways, great start so far on this one. But no, we're doing Primal Rage, and I chose this game for a number of reasons. One, we're covering most of the ports for this game. I try to, once a year, do a ports episode. Last year we did Spider-Man, 2001. I just think it's interesting. It's something I enjoy, kind of like comparing and contrasting the different ports for a game. And this is like the perfect game for this episode because there are so many ports for this game. 17 to be exact. We're not going to go over all 17, but we'll go over what they are. So you have the 3DO, the 32X, the Amiga 1200, Jaguar CD, the Game Boy, the Game Gear, DOS, and there's actually technically 4 versions for DOS based on different megabytes, PlayStation, Genesis, Saturn, Super Nintendo, Tiger R-Zone, Tiger LCD games, there's actually 2 different versions of it, Midway Arcade Treasures 2, which is on the Xbox, the GameCube, the PlayStation 2, and the PC. So, crazy amount of ports for this game. It's the perfect one to pick for this. Also, Nate and I grew up playing this game. I love this game. I know we've mentioned it several times on the podcast before, but end of the day, man, it's dinosaurs fighting. What more could you ask for? Also, before we get started, let me tell y'all to please subscribe for updated episodes. We are on Spodcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google. Well, it's on YouTube now, I think, connected, right?
Google shut down.
It's done,
Right,
though.
so I think it's all connected through YouTube, but speaking of, check out YouTube. Please subscribe to that so you get notified when new videos pop up. It's been a lot of fun doing YouTube. Also, please check us out on Discord. We're very active on there. I'm Spider-Man on there.
I'm LaBerry.
LaBerry.
I'm Eat Me, I'm a Danish.
It's been a lot of fun chatting with everybody, and this is a great one for conversations because there's so many different versions of this game. Everybody's got different opinions. Let us hear them. Now, let's give you some backstory on Primal Rage. First and foremost, let's set the mood. This is right in the midst of the 90s when arcade fighting games were everything, man. You're coming off Street Fighter, you're coming off Mortal Kombat, which was like, top of the food chain at this point. Atari wanted their own Mortal Kombat. They decided to go bigger. They decided to go badder. I'm struggling today.
Brian's a little off today. It's fine.
It's need more caffeines.
I don't know if you need more or less.
I don't know. It's like a weird, I'm not rushing. I don't know. We'll figure this out. But no, they wanted to go big and bold, so they went with dinosaurs. This game was actually pitched during, they had an annual meeting where everybody would just throw ideas at the wall and what sounded cool and what sounded fun. One of the devs was like, let's do a dinosaur fighting game. And then someone else was like, well, what if they were gods? And it kind of just became this amalgamation of this game into the flesh after everybody kind of pitching their own ideas, which was really awesome, honestly.
That's how game design should be instead of what can make us the most money,
Yeah. But it's cool too, they really tried to push this game more than just a game. They wanted to hit that Mortal Kombat and transcend pop culture. So there's t-shirts, they had really badass action figures, honestly, which are super fun. I have a couple of them, but they're pretty big and they're all action features. There's board games, there's slide projector things, if you remember those from the 90s. Just tons and tons of merchandise for this game. They really wanted this to take off. Also, there was comic books by Sirius. I'm not familiar with the publisher, but there are comic books out there, and I want them desperately.
Did one of you have one?
I don't,
wish.
unfortunately.
Oh, I thought one of you had one of the Primal Rage comics.
I want them so bad, dude, because they look pretty cool. I mean, it's dinosaurs fighting. Again, I can't stress that enough how awesome that is. But they really wanted this to take off. The arcade version was developed and published by Atari in 1994. Cover some ground here. 3DO, 32X, Jaguar, CD, Saturn. They're all developed by Atari and published by Time Warner Interactive. The 3DO and the Saturn version came out on January 1st, 95. Jaguar CD version came out December 1st, 95, and the PlayStation version came out December 19th, 1995. Genesis and the PlayStation versions were developed by good old folks at Probe. Pretty fun there. Released August 25th, 1995 for the Genesis and just Genesis version. It's a lot to go through. Super Nintendo version was August 1st, 95, and it was developed by Bitmasters. So I think we've got enough of the fun facts out of the way. Let's dive in and talk some story. All right, the story, the all-important story of a fighting game. Basically, there's a big-ass meteor strike that hits the Earth, and it kind of sends humanity back into the Stone Age. Nature pretty much takes over the Earth again, and the continents shift into a giant dinosaur skull shape, and it's actually referred to Earth. That's URTH if you're keeping track at home. Yeah, but basically it goes back into the Stone Age. There's dinosaurs that come from the ground. Well, not all dinosaurs, excuse me. There's apes also, but they all come from the ground. Or from outer space on a meteor if you're the snake lady. But these creatures are basically worshipped as gods, and the followers are basically the spread out in humanity based on which god they serve. Some of them have good, they want to keep the peace of Earth. Some of them have their own malicious means, and they want to conquer and destroy everything. So it's kind of like Godzilla stuff going on here.
Which ones are the good ones?
It's funny you mentioned that. Blizzard, the snow yeti, the god of good and virtue, was frozen in a glacier within the Himalayas, but a meteor strike woke him up.
Okay.
He's the blue ape. He's the cover boy if you see him on every single one. He's kind of like a combo machine if you were talking about play style.
Having him as the cover boy was a choice.
Yeah, a dinosaur fighting game.
Right.
When I thought it could have been a dinosaur.
Yeah.
You would think.
You think about 94, 95. When did Jurassic Park come out?
92, 93-ish, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I would have stamped fucking one of the dinos on there.
The plethora
Either
of
Sauron
dinosaurs?
or
Yeah.
Diablo.
You would totally think so, but we're talking about Atari here, the kings of shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Put Microsoft to shame. Another good one's Armadon. He's like the bipedal triceratops guy with the spikes. He's the god of life, and he lived peacefully underneath the Earth's core before the meteor struck. Everyone kind of equates him to the Ryu of the game. He's balanced. He's got some projectiles. He does good damage. He's got decent combos. He's kind of like the character you're supposed to pick if you're kind of just starting. Talon's another good one, apparently, even though he's kind of a dick. He's the god of survival, and he was the chief of the Raptor clan on the South Pacific Island until a meteor struck. He's really fast. He's small. He's agile. He's got a sweet grab attack. Combos for days with him. Kind of like the Wolverine in Marvel vs. Capcom. And then the last good guy is Sauron. He's the purple and yellow T-Rex.
He's the last good guy?
He's good? This is crazy when I read you his character description.
Okay.
It's even more so.
All right.
He's the god of hunger, and he eats the flesh of humanity in order to stay immortal ever since the meteor struck the Earth and wiped out all of his food. Explain to me how he's a good guy. He's the only character who can eat his own
Who
worship.
categorizes him as a good guy?
This is from the developers. And behind the scenes bonus. Yeah.
I mean, he eats his own followers.
Yeah, he's the only one that can eat his own.
All right, man.
Yeah. Look, man, don't shoot the messenger, all right? This is Atari's doing. He's a good mix between fast and heavy attacks. I think Barry, he was your guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as the bad guys, the destructive beast, they're the ones that want to plunge the world further into chaos. Speaking of chaos, he's the ape that belches and farts. He's the color swapped from Blizzard. He was formerly a witch doctor who became a prehistoric ape as the result of evolutionary experiments gone wrong. He's smaller than the other ape. He's a little faster. He's combo heavy.
I thought it said that he did some kind of ritual of gone wrong and got turned into an ape, and he has to kill all the gods in order to reattain his form.
Yeah, dude, it's...
And inside of the Super Nintendo manual, it's just
a
him
barbarian
with a chick on his arm as a human.
Speaking of the Super Nintendo manual, woo! Spoiler alert, it's the best port manual. We'll put the pictures in the Discord. It's pretty great. You can't miss them. They're wonderful.
Talon's a playboy.
Another bad guy is Vertigo. That's the snake lady. She's the goddess of insanity. She was freed. Doesn't really say she came on a meteor. but it says she was trapped on the moon. I'm assuming she rode on the meteor or something to get here. Doesn't really explain. But she's got combos for days, like crazy reach. She can grab you across the screen pretty much. She's definitely like the distance closing character. And then the last bad guy, my personal favorite, is Diablo. He's the fire-breathing red T-Rex. He's the god of evil and destruction. He was trapped in his fiery prison until the meteor struck Earth. But yeah, he's smaller than the purple one. He's like very projectile-based. He can teleport, so he can cover distance. He's my favorite, hands down. I played with him as a kid. I thought he looked cool, but now actually playing again, I'm like, yeah, this is my favorite. As far as the story goes, man, like we're talking fighting games here. There's never a ton of meat on the bone. I mean, I do appreciate them trying to make something here with the story, and especially some of the other ports do a better job with like the cutscene intros. It was the 3DO and the Saturn that had the intros right. They tried their best, man. It's what are you gonna say, man? It's dinosaurs fighting. They did what they could.
I feel like this is the same argument we had with Golden Axe.
Yeah.
Where they had like backstories for them and character stories, but it was like kind of a nothing thing at the end of it.
It's hard to do in fighting games unless it's like a continued franchise. Like Tekken's got 8 games, so of course there's going to be more meat on the bone for the characters. But like, if you're starting out a franchise and then you're like, oh yeah, we want to turn it to this giant thing, unless everybody picks up the books and the board games and like you don't know. And even then, it's probably completely different.
Yeah, I feel like with fighting games, like ultimately you just need a reason to be fighting each other, because like the ones where it's like they just all showed up at a tournament, and it's like then there's like some crazy outro where you're like, this has nothing to do with anything. At least this has like a reason for them all coming together trying to kill each other. Like I'll give them credit there. Fighting games are tough, like especially like, generally it's on an arcade and you have like maybe a 30-second window at the beginning and maybe a 30-second window at the end to kind of tell your story. So
I mean, I feel like with arcade or fighting games, if it's your first fighting game and the gameplay isn't there, no one's coming back for the story anyway. So it's like you can try and establish a decent story, but you are held back by the detriment of the gameplay. So if you don't even get a chance to like continue that in a second one because nobody wants to play your game, then you never get the opportunity to bounce further. I mean, that's like with Soul Blade. So you had Soul Blade, and then we had Soul Calibur. Or wait, Soul Blade came first.
Yeah.
And then that branched off into Soul Calibur, and then at that point, like, everyone came back for the gameplay because it was really the only good, like, weapon-based, like, fighting game. And so then at that opportunity, they got to expand on it further in Soul Calibur 2. And then they made that smart choice of having guest characters to pull people in. And then after that, it was like, cool, we got 3, and then they got to continue on a story base. But if you don't have anything in the initial part to, like, pull people into it, where are you going to go, you know?
Well, and also the fact that we're talking about dinosaurs here, they can't, like, express emotions. It's, you know, it's very much like the Lion King remake where it's like, blank face, I'm angry, you know?
Yeah, it's like, where are you going to go with this one when, like, the entire narrative of your story is driven by your followers?
Right.
And not really told from the perspective of, like, the gods, I suppose.
Characters.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, even if this game was a crazy, huge, revolutionary, more popular than Street Fighter, like, how are you supposed to establish something further after that?
Right.
I don't want to touch on it too much because it's a different game and that's got its own whole story, but the sequel was going to expand upon some story notes a little bit where, like, humans figured out how to turn into these, like, god/guardians, and there's, like, some human...
Fucking Animorphs?
Yeah, kind of. They're big and bad like the characters from this game, so it's like there's like a power struggle with like the ones who aren't complying with the guys trying to take over versus it's all because of developers like we want actual human characters we can market, not creatures. Kind of piggybacking on what you said earlier, where it's like they can't really express them, you can't really do much with them. So there's like weird compromise where you can like shift shapes and shit in this second one.
I feel like Killer Instinct kind of suffered the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, it looked amazing, but
there wasn't really much there.
That's a bad robot. That's a good robot.
People back on.
We need a ninja chick. Yeah.
It's tough, man. Like, truthfully, I don't think anyone's like, you know, an expert on Primal Rage lore, so I think we've covered enough for the story. I'm struggling, boys. So let's move on to the important stuff. Let's talk gameplay. So the gameplay. So what we're looking at here, it's a one-on-one fighter. There are different, I don't want to say gimmicks, let's say mechanics that separate this from other fighting games of the time. Biggest thing is something I appreciate, where all the characters, there's not very many of them. There's only 7 characters in the game, right? There are a couple color swaps, but they behave and act so much differently mechanically than even their color swapped counterparts. Like every character feels like a completely different beast, if you will. We briefly mentioned it, like the apes, for example. Blizzard, like a slower, heavier, plays like Sub-Zero, even with the ice and everything. He's got projectiles. And then Fart Boy doesn't. I don't remember Fart Boy's name. Chaos, thank you. Yeah, he doesn't. He's got, different
projectiles.
Different kind of projectiles, though. Like, they will literally go across the screen. It's very...
They're like heat-seeking and stuff.
Yeah, he's got,
he's got
realistic...
spit.
Right, he's got crazy projectiles. Every character feels different. I do appreciate that, especially when you do have such a small roster. That's mega important. So, bravo for the devs on that.
Yeah, they all feel pretty tight. I know, one of the criticisms for the original Mortal Kombat specifically is that, a lot of them do just feel like color swaps. Mm-hmm. And, they might have a different projectile than the next guy, but, the size, the shapes, and stuff in this one changes the hitbox, changes kind of your approach to how you're going to take a fight. So... where fighting games lack in story, they need to excel in gameplay. And thankfully, I think this one does a lot of unique things that help it stand out in a very crowded market at the time, too.
Yeah, and honestly, I remember liking this game as a kid because, literally dinosaurs fight. But playing it again now, it was man, this game does a lot of things differently. Plus, there was a really cool YouTube video I checked out. I want to give a shout out to the guy. It's PNDK and M is the name of the channel. He did an interview with one of the devs where basically they break down very deep into a bunch of the fighting mechanics that I don't know shit about because I'm a very casual fighting fan. They're talking about covering distance and cancels and all that stuff and how this game does so many things differently. So please go check that video out. It's a 30-minute video, but it was so informative and so interesting, honestly. Even to get an interview from a dev from that long ago, to let him sit down and talk to him for an hour, super cool. So I want to give that a shout out really quick. But, some of the other things this game does for the time, that's, obviously it's going to have your Mortal Kombat parallels. Everyone's going to chase that dragon. Mortal Kombat was on top of the world, right? There is blood and violence in this game, but I don't think it's gory. It's violent, but it's not gory, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're not ripping limbs off and
Yeah, you'll get a splat, but you're not going to be devouring, which would be kind of awesome for dinosaurs.
I mean, they chomp on each other and you can eat the villagers.
It's true. Like I said, it's violent, but it's not gory, if that makes sense,
I don't know, pools of blood and blood spray everywhere is
you're not
gory
ripping spines out
for,
and stuff,
for
right.
standards like that.
And then the hearts explode too. I heard about that shit. That's just
they splatter in the corner of the screen and blow up. I would say it's more so than Mortal Kombat.
Mortal Kombat, when you can rip spines out and shit,
I mean, in the punch by punch gameplay, it's so much.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think so.
I mean, Mortal Kombat's got, I feel more gory fates. We didn't even see in the fatalities because we don't know how to do them. But their fatalities is where the gore is. But prior to that, it's really just uppercut and he flies through the screen. Not just huge pools of blood laying across the ground.
Eating people.
There are, if you get those 3-hit combos and you see it does get pretty bloody.
I think it's got overall, I think it's one of the more gory. I think it's probably the most gory one I can think of on the market at the time. But Mortal Kombat's got those punches in smaller areas.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or it's not the whole time you're playing it.
Right,
I mean, this one has an option to turn the gore off. Mm-hmm. So
I don't remember this one causing as much outrage. Mortal Kombat took a lot of smoke for a lot of...
No, because they're people.
Right.
I think people have differences between animals fighting and people fighting.
Yeah.
It's perfect time since you brought it up. The only big stink with this game was... What's Stinky Boy Ape's name? Chaos?
Mm-hmm.
He has a finisher where basically he pisses acid on the body, but it's covered in smoke so you can't see it. That is not in the Super Nintendo version for clarity. So that's the only thing that even caused any sort of rise with this game,
Because it's a humanoid creature.
Right.
Imagine if he was a dog.
Everybody...
People probably think it'd be funny.
Wait till they find out everything pisses. Everything has to piss. It's crazy.
Oh, man.
Yeah. That's the only,
What a different world back then.
Yeah.
For real. But also, we touched on it. Finishers. That's, I think, the only similarities it really shares with Mortal Kombat. Mechanically, it's a much different game.
It's a lot tighter.
It's really interesting, too, in that same interview with the... Where's his name? PNDK and M. Talk about how it's literally PNDK and M. It must be for, punch, nothing, duck combo, man.
It's PNDK and symbol
M,
right?
Yep. I want to give him a shout out because it was a great video, honestly. But the same dev talks in there how they wanted to design this cabinet as like a 4-button cabinet as compared to like the 6 where most were going. Name was Steven Resenberger was the game designer. He said he wanted it to be accessible if you walked up to the thing where you can actually like do combos, find buttons, but also if you were like a pro level player, you could like shine because you knew what you were doing. They said they intentionally didn't add a block button because it's one more thing you had to worry about. They wanted you to be able to like master it, learn it. With that being said though, the biggest gripe in the game with most people is like actually activating these combos and activating these special moves, right? If you think of most games, like you look at Street Fighter, you look at Tekken, I mean, Darkstalkers, every fighting game I can think of, it's always the movement first and then the button press. This game at launch did it the inverse way. So you basically had to hold the button down and then do the swoop or the movement to do the activation for the special move.
I thankfully got rid of that.
Right. So like later reiterations and some of the arcade or some of the home ports fixed it. Not all of them. We'll go over that. But it is something to be aware of. Truthfully, it sounds a lot worse than it really is. It didn't bother me once I learned it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's one of those things, once your brain gets used to it, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Initially, I saw that too, and I was like, oh man, but not as bad once you actually start playing it. Your brain kind of autocorrects pretty quickly.
I mean, Barry really helped me out with the Super Nintendo version, like literally holding the manual open and being like, hold these buttons and hold these buttons at the same time.
I'm pretty sure that's the only one we had that even explained like special moves.
Yeah.
The PlayStation one didn't have them listed at all.
Nope.
I don't think the 32X one did when I looked in it.
I don't think it does, no.
So, and then it's like I have this complaint and I don't have this complaint at the same time, but all of the ports, like some of them had the option to do a training area. And then some of them had like, you fight and then you fight a player. Like that's all the options you had.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to give me access to the button moves and not give me access to a training area, it's really difficult to sit there and learn things if you're getting your ass beat by another dinosaur the whole time.
Yeah, because on normal, this isn't particularly like an easy game either.
No.
So, yeah.
So it's like I have this complaint with fighters, and maybe it's just me like wanting quality of life improvements, but like fighting games without an area to like practice just don't make sense to me. I just don't want to invest my time into it.
Well, especially when you are doing things differently. You know what I mean? It's a requirement.
Yeah, I mean, if you introduce new systems,
for having training.
Like if you're introducing a new system or a new style to a fighting game, you need to give people the ability to try out that new system, not in a stressful environment. Mm-hmm. It's like if I'm getting juggled constantly and I don't understand how this new system works and I can't sit there and dissect it and pick it apart to try and learn it, then I'm not going to want to pick up your game. That's just the reality of it. I'm sure other people don't. I'm not like a super big fighting game person, but when I play fighting games, it's because I get access to that.
Right.
I don't want to sit there and like have to guess.
Nobody wants to sit there and play a game that they struggle at. You know what I mean? Like the hook of fighting games, especially in an arcade setting, is like, how far can I get and can I keep beating this thing's ass? Like, it's tough.
Why would I want to play a game that makes me hate myself?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I have no desire.
I don't fuck with Dark Souls. I will say it was interesting though, hearing the developers like why they chose that reverse method. Was they wanted for like high level play, basically like when you're in an arcade machine standing next to somebody, you can kind of do like pump fakes or fake outs with the button press. So if like you throw the punch but you keep it held down, then you do the swoop, you can kind of almost do a fake. So it kind of like added a high level in the arcade. Doesn't really work well when you translate it to bringing it home with a controller playing against the computer though. So like I think it's a great idea for 2-player play, but at the detriment of single player, if that makes sense.
I feel like that idea is very interesting and maybe ahead of its time technologically. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like maybe that time period was the time where a system could inherently do that. Yeah. Because there were some of the ports where it was just like, I felt like the button response wasn't even there. Yeah. So it's like, if you're going to try and attempt feints, I can't even pull the actual move off.
Bro, sometimes it wasn't even animations like wouldn't even register on some of these ports.
I would be interested to see if they had that idea with the accessibility of how fighting game mechanics can work now in implementing that. I would be curious if they were like, we're going to completely remake Primal Rage now with the technology that we can do currently, and if it would feel any different or if it would still fail as like a whole new fighting system. Because I think people are more open now to new fighting systems than the 90s.
For sure. Yeah. This was like, you know, you had your 2 established ones and then everything was trying to like either rip off those or like overly complicate with technology and stuff and just fail miserably. So fighting games are definitely, they found their little niche nowadays. I feel like back then it was kind of like a cash grab. It's almost like a BR or a MOBA nowadays. That's how fighting games were. But there's several mechanics in this game. I think they like forward thinking for sure. There's like, even if they're meters, you know, there's 2 meters in this game. There's your health meter, and then there's your
stun meter,
brain meter.
Yeah, the stun.
Yeah, and I think it's a cool to get like a heads up display of like, this is where I'm at before I get stunned, and you know, it regenerates slowly when you're not getting comboed, but it'll show you kind of like your windows, which is extremely helpful in a fighting game, especially if you don't know what you're doing particularly. So like, kudos honestly for most of their choices in this game.
Yeah, in that same interview, Steven Rosenberg, the developer, was saying that they wanted everything to be visual. They didn't want you to have any sort of guesswork. And that's why they included a meter for the stun.
Yeah, but they didn't put my move list in there.
Yeah, they should have. No, honestly, I don't remember if the arcade has like the Mortal Kombat 3 style with like the combos.
Like around the window?
I think it does. I know there's 2 different arcade versions also. So there's your traditional like stand-up, and then there's a weird one that's like a TV that's horizontal.
I feel like we saw that on one of the advertisements.
Yeah, the ads got it, yep.
Yeah.
I definitely prefer the more traditional just because I think it's more aesthetically pleasing. You get the really cool Primal Rage decals on the side. The other one like looks futuristic, but if it was 1994, you know. So, but yeah, it is an interesting point where they did try to do things differently, because like Street Fighter is a great example. It's like, if you know what you're doing, you look amazing, but if you don't know what you're doing, it's like, what the fuck? How am I supposed to tell? So having it be visual instead of like, keep practicing, keep throwing quarters in.
It's like a 4-player cabinet, but it's only for 2 people.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I definitely prefer the traditional.
The box with you guys crammed up next to each other.
Just so I can do them pump fakes, bro. Like, he's holding the button. I hear it. But even there's something interesting with the 1.0 version of this game. The cheese, obviously, every version we played doesn't have it at home, but the actual arcade machine itself has a no cheese pop-up. So if you start spamming a move over and over, it will let you not land it, or it'll icon will come up with the cheese with a red international sign of no through it. Again, it goes into the visual aspects of this game. Super interesting. Another thing I do like in this game is the insane mode activates when you're basically low on health, so it kind of lets you be able to come back. You're invincible for 3 seconds, and you blink, and you do like extra damage. I can imagine like going back to the talk of this being for high-level players. Like, that's one of my favorite things when I'm watching 2 good players fight, is like, oh shit, this dude might come back. And they have that ability to be able to do it against the computer, I think was really fun. Like, really cool idea.
Yeah, no doubt. It's adds a chance where you're like, I'm not gonna. You just a lot of times with fighting games, if I'm just getting my ass, I put the controller, I'm like, all right, I'm ready for this next round, recover. And it gives you a chance to kind of literally till the end of the round have a chance to beat the guy. So I think that's a big addition that is a great design choice, honestly.
I think, Barry, you want to match with that, right?
I didn't know how to activate that shit.
I think it's automatic.
I don't even know. I just slapped the controller and prayed. I didn't know what I was doing.
That is one thing I will say about this game. The 2.0 version where they switch the controls back, you can button mash and you'll be okay. Like, it's...
I did that overhand slap button style like I was playing the bongos. So I don't know.
Another mechanic this game does differently is the worshiper mechanic, which I thought was pretty fun. If you do a high-level combo, you're basically the worshipers in the background who are, you know, praising you for being the awesome dinosaur god that you are. They'll run into the foreground and start, like, bowing to you. You can eat them if you're the enemy player and get their health back. So it's pretty fun.
I couldn't figure out how to eat them.
I got to work one time, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what the fuck I did. I was pushing down and getting buttons and stuff.
Didn't really say it in the manual for me to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
I know if you eat your own worshippers, though, it hurts you, right?
Yeah, you lose a little health. But also, if you don't want to eat him, you can literally just kick him around like a volleyball and keep smacking him in the air. And it's funny every time.
It is very satisfying to watch those little dudes fly around and scream.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
I didn't know what they were at first. The first time we played it, because the first one we played was the arcade one.
Yeah.
And I thought I was shooting out like... I don't know what I thought. I was playing Talon, that little raptor guy, and I don't know anything about these characters other than they look cool and dinosaurs. So I thought the first time they flew across the screen, I didn't notice them, and I thought I was shooting out like some kind of poison projectile because they were green. And then I was like, oh, they're running around. Oh, those are people. But maybe they weren't really clear in the arcade version. I'm not sure.
Some of these versions are definitely not clear. We'll talk about that when they get the graphics.
Overall, this actually played a lot better than I remembered it. 'Cause like you said, we had this game when we were children. We played the hell out of this game. I was a little worried going back and be like, man, this isn't going to be good. I'm not going to like it as much as I did. But
Same.
like honestly, surprising like how much it held up through the years, and it's still like a really good fighting game. It's mechanically solid. It has some faults, but nothing's perfect. But like overall, like I was really impressed with how good of a game it is. So I'm really happy to report the gameplay is like a high mark for me.
Yeah, same. It's a breath of fresh air and definitely for the time oversaturated market. Even compared to the other dinosaur game, I don't remember what the name of it is that Taito made. Just look how much better 1 year later this game is compared to that. Like it stands on its own. Like obviously you see the arcade cabinet and it's super loud. Like the graphics are pretty is what this game's known for. But I don't think it gets enough credit as being like a great fighter also. So you can just pick up and play or you can master and you look amazing. It's got the best of both worlds, honestly. Like it's a very solid fighting game in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like this game, same with Golden Axe when we were talking about it. It's hard to convert people over who are dedicated to their fighting game. And I don't think anybody disliked this game. I just think it was probably viewed as a gimmicky.
Yeah.
Oh, cool, dinosaur fighting, and not taken to a serious level in the way that like Street Fighter or another humanoid game would be, which is probably why on your point of the second game being more of a humanoid style, is they recognize that too, where it's like, a fighting game in this market isn't going to be taken seriously as a real competitive game if I don't put people in it. So, I don't think anybody said this game was bad. I just don't know if it had the serious quote-unquote flavor behind it to compete with something like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or SNK or anything like that. So
it's an interesting time for fighting games too. Like they clearly wanted to make this a franchise as much as they pumped stuff behind it, but yeah, it didn't have quite like the legs. And like commercial, this game was a huge success in the arcade, and then
sold million units arcade. 1.5 million arcade units is crazy, dude.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And then that's where it stayed. It's like, okay, it's cool novelty in the arcade where I can go play it, but like I'm gonna go home and play my Street Fighter.
Right. Well, that's another thing too. This is a weird time where it's like arcade was falling out, but a lot of the developers still, especially Atari, like saw it as king. Because you gotta think, like their home console at the time was the fucking Jaguar, so like they weren't in a rush to get this thing into the home market, but they saw the success of Mortal Kombat and was like, okay, we gotta get this to home market.
I just feel like Atari's always kind of been like a smidge behind.
They're the kings of being it. Like you think Sega's bad, you think Microsoft's bad. Nah, bro. Like,
Atari's always been a smidge behind.
Think about it. Even all the way to like the 7800, 5600, they're just like, they got the revolver and they shot all 6 shots into their foot, bro. Just.
I mean, what they were releasing that like HD 7800 or whatever this year. Is it 7800 that they're doing?
Yeah.
I'm like,
everybody hates the 7800.
Brother, nobody wants that, and we've had something that can play that for years. Like, why would I want to buy a dedicated HD 7800 when I can just like go do this on any other piece of equipment?
That's the thing. So like Atari is owned by somebody else now, so they're just milking everything they've got since they've spent so much money into it. But still,
they're just like Atari's just like,
it's so Atari of them, dude.
Oh, the Super Nintendo Mini and the Genesis Mini and the PlayStation Mini.
Fuck a 2600 that everyone loves. Let's do.
They did
Atari
that
actually,
one.
Yeah, that one makes sense at least. It's a beloved console.
And who bought it?
Yeah.
Do you guys have one?
I have one.
I don't think I do.
Nate, the Atari boy, doesn't have one.
I don't think I do.
Yeah, but like
I have an Atari. I don't.
Anything past that, maybe some computers. There were some decent Atari computers. But
I just think they're a smidge behind. They're always been a smidge, but even now, like they're starting to come back to it. But I'm just like, you're still establishing and doing things that like we did years ago. Like you need to catch up.
I mean, physical edition of carts for $70 is a step behind.
I appreciate the fact that like Atari has like a long time name in like the industry as a whole. Like Atari is like a legacy name. Like I'll take Atari seriously because it really did start like a whole leg, right?
Yeah.
But they never got out of it.
Right.
So either like reestablish yourself as I don't know. It's just
the company that
Atari's just like gimmicky at this point.
Yeah.
They're like holding on to a dead era.
It's not like a real company that owns them. It's clearly like we bought this for the name, which like you can do
like the gimmick, yeah.
And you can do stuff with that if you stay in your lane. It's when you try to get cute and like compete or like the VCS was a bomb. Like,
I mean, even then, it's like you're catering to people who like don't buy games anymore.
And especially like the games, I can separate outdated, but like they don't age well.
No,
they're not. They're classics. They're not. Doesn't mean they're like relevant now. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Like, brother, Gen Z out here thinking the PlayStation 1 is irrelevant. Like, you can't
You have
put
no
that
fucking
out.
chance. Sorry,
no.
I love you, but you have no chance. Like,
yeah, I'm an Atari guy, but like
you're catering to old people that like, damn, I remember the Atari. Like, they should just be plug and plays. Like, you shouldn't really go anything after that.
You got to start making things that appeal to people that are under the age of 20.
Yep.
Good luck.
Under the age of 30, even.
Honestly.
Primal Rage full remaster would do that. goddammit. But yeah.
That's past the Primal Rage. I'll get off my Ataris.
But they did do a great job with the gameplay of this game.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny though. This is a good segue to get into the graphics.
That's the segue.
Yes. So again, talking about Atari kind of being, off the ball here. The graphics were the standout for this game. I think most people...
Sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes. Talking about the arcade version, like, the way they did it even was pretty awesome. So basically the graphic style, it's not like Mortal Kombat where they took video and they, like, filmed the person. They actually built handmade puppets for every creature. And then every single character's got 400 frames, and it's stop motion. Like, it looks awesome. Especially in the arcade version when it's going fast. It looks like an action figure or claymation kind of, but it looks really cool. It stands out, especially when you have the big sprites in the arcade version. It looks awesome in my opinion, man. I'm a huge fan of like classic Ray Harryhausen and Land of the Gwangi where you have dinosaurs fight. It reminds me of that, so it reminds me of my childhood.
You can see the influence in the Harryhausen stuff for sure, and it looks awesome in video game form.
I'm all about it, man. Like, I think it looks cool. It's obviously aged for the time, but I remember being a kid and walking into like Pizza Hut and seeing this thing and just being like, whoa, dude, this is awesome. Just huge sprites. They're fast. They're fluid. There's shit going on in the background. There's dinosaurs moving in the background, flying, the worshipers. Cool shit like the lightning. Like, this arcade cabinet was big. It got your attention. It was fucking loud. Like, this was a really cool cabinet just to walk by and see.
I remember going to the arcade with you as small children, and like ran into this game first, like almost every single time I went, dude. It was an eye catcher, and it was definitely like worth the time you're playing on it when there's a lot of competition back then. But like they did a great job as far as like grabbing your attention and the look of it. I think it aged. I mean, it looks aged now, but it did age fairly gracefully compared to a lot of other stuff from the time. Like
some of them.
The
arcade version.
I'm just speaking of the arcade version, yeah, because some of them, woo. But overall, yeah, dude. I think even if you watch old film, like some of the stop motion stuff, I know obviously it looks dated, but it looks better than some of the shit that came out 10 years ago even. Like, you know what you're gonna get, and it's at least it's consistent, and it looks, at least there's like natural movement. So
yeah, I'll even give them a pass for the color swaps just because of how they made this. Like, a lot of times it's like, even for color swap characters in other games, for example, Mortal Kombat, you push the high punch is the exact same animation. Some of the characters that are color swapped have different animations in this. So, like, hats off. It's pretty cool. Let's go ahead.
I don't think you commit to doing stop motion / claymation unless you are truly passionate about your project. It is a horrifyingly long task if anybody doesn't know. Yeah. That is something that you have to commit to, and if you can't just change your mind in the middle of it, like, it's a full-on production. And then I was watching like a developer documentary of like kind of behind the scenes stuff, and there's just like one of the like big wigs is like watching him. He's like freaking out how long it takes just to get a couple of frames. It's like it's every frame you have to animate. You don't understand. Yeah. I can't just. He's like, well, make his arm go. It's like, I have to make his arm go here, then here, then here. He's like, you won't just swoop it. And he was like dumbfounded, like, how much are we spending on this? Like, it was pretty funny, but I think it's a really unique, cool approach to like the style and the presentation of this game for sure.
Yeah, it stands out. Another cool thing for Mortal Kombat fans, the worshipers are Mortal Kombat style, where it's like filmed people and they move. So if you're into that, that's what they look like.
Some of them.
Yeah. Some of them.
I think that they stand out better on the screen, where like your continue screen after you die, like you get a little bit more up close look at some of those models, even though they move goofy, but like you can tell it looks very Mortal Kombat in those screens.
Yeah. Well, I think this is also the first thing from port to port we're going to notice the major differences as well. So I think that's a good summary for the graphics for the arcade version. I don't really want to break down version by version every category because that'll be insanity and madness. I think we'll kind of do a pros and cons style for all of them after we talk about sound in the music. So sound and the music, I think this is honestly another thing that makes this game stand out. We touched on it briefly, like this is a big, loud arcade cabinet. The sound adds to it, man. The music's really like upbeat. You kind of got some DK bongos going on. It's loud. The thunder's super loud. It's the thing I remember from the arcade version where those speakers are like deafening when you get the combos and it's insanity. What did you guys think about the audio overall?
Depending on the version, I guess.
Definitely.
It's just the mixing was so drastically different in some of the versions.
Yeah.
I was surprised that like some of the CD ones were so quiet in comparison to like some of the
I was surprised some of the CD ones didn't have music at all unless you played it on a PS3, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting too, because like, I mean, obviously, you know, the music ones are going to be better on CD, but even some of those CD versions weren't arcade perfect. Like you had the sound. Why wouldn't you convert it?
Was this made initially arcade first and then ported everywhere?
Yes.
Okay, so that just makes sense on why the Atari and the Saturn or the Sega ones were better.
Right.
Same deal. We've talked about this with Golden Axe. Like
Yep.
Sega systems are just made for arcade, and it makes sense that they just played better on the Sega consoles.
Here's what I don't get though.
They sounded better on them too.
So like Atari, for example, this is their baby. Y'all didn't optimize this shit for your system. It's on a CD.
It wasn't the worst.
It's true. Definitely was not the worst.
It wasn't the worst one.
So crazy fun fact about the audio though, the Saturn version is the only version that has Redbook audio. It's the only one on disc. If you guys don't know Redbook audio, it's basically like the main way compact disc have audio files stored in them. So it's the only one with actual arcade sounds and actual
Saturn's
arcade music.
the only one.
Mm-hmm. Not even the PlayStation
Makes
version.
a lot of sense now that you say that.
Yeah.
Because the PlayStation 3DO is terrible. I don't remember the sound being so terribly bad in the Jaguar version though.
No, it wasn't horrible.
It was more comparable to the cartridges than the disc, though, honestly.
I suppose the quality. I just mean like
overall,
functioning.
Oh, yeah.
It functioned.
It wasn't a 3DO where it was Yeah, so full disclosure, the 3DO version, it's got these awesome animated cutscenes, which apparently the Saturn version does also. But on the 3DO version, the narrator lady turns into a fish towards the end of it while it's loading. She'll literally be like, Blizzard, the great ice ape is a...
Yeah,
and then
it's
it
like,
loads.
I think Nate brought it up when we were playing it. Like, I think that's that moment where it starts loading to go into the next point, and it just stutters so badly that it's like, it's got to give up. So, like, the graphic and the actual, like, video freezes, and then it's like if your DVD player, like, hits that scratch, and it doesn't know what to do past that point because it keeps bouncing back and forth. But that's just how every single one was at the end.
It's hilarious, man. It's horrible, sure, but it cracked me up, and I was like, this is the version we're 100%ing because I want to see this shit. But luckily, like I said, the Saturn version also has the animations. As far as I like the overall music in this game, man. Like, every stage feels kind of different. It is upbeat and fast, which I do prefer in a fighting game. I think anything that can kind of add to the atmosphere. And honestly, my favorite part of the sound of this game, it's going to sound stupid, but it's nostalgia. It gets brownie points for nostalgia. It's like every time I hear those parrots in the beginning and like that shit's like permanently burnt into my head. And even like flipping it on the different versions, I'm like, it just makes me happy, man. It's pure nostalgia. And then between every round, hearing the narrator rage, that shit's burnt into my memory. Bro.
I feel like with a fighting game, you need like a hard ass fucking like, you know, fight. You need like an iconic one. I think this one has a good one with the rage.
Definitely.
I think overall the sound design's pretty good in this game. I think it sounds quality, depending on what version you're playing, to be very clear. But as far as the overall design, they did a good job with everything. It all fits. There's nothing. Every once in a while, you play a fighting game, you'll get that one stage, you're like, oh, this fucking stage because this damn song. I didn't experience one as far as like design wise in this game where I was like, this sounds stupid. Now, limitation wise, obviously, yeah, but
I mean, all of the fighting effects sounded good too.
yeah, the grunts and stuff. That's also important.
The followers and stuff when they get damaged or when they like bite things. So even outside of the music, like the actual effects were good. And it was nice that, like, really kind of every move was given a sound instead of just, like, a swipe having nothing and just, you know, because you could have had, I guess, a dinosaur do a bite and a chomp noise. Or maybe, like, the tail would have swiped, but then if they do anything else, they could have kept those moves silent. I feel like every single one had a specific noise for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
It all feels weighty, and I think especially if you're playing a fighting game with giant creatures, it kind of adds to that atmosphere of making it feel like it's got weight behind it instead of just like a whoosh, it's like whoosh, it's heavier and everything sounds like a swooping. It sounds very like there's some momentum behind it.
Was there a loud thud noise when they would get like launched up in the air and fell?
Yeah,
not like you jumping and landing, but like getting caught in the air and falling.
Yeah, there's like a big thrust, almost like a whoosh. Yeah,
my favorite noise, honestly, though, is like when you smack them and the blood comes out. When the blood like splats the ground, it's like a thud, but it's like kind of wet sounding because it's blood. Obviously, it's fun. Definitely in the arcade version and the Saturn version, it's noticeable that it's lacking in the other versions if you're landing a bunch of combos. Like I said, I used Diablo and I had plenty of combos with him, so I was getting that a lot, and it was just for a game that was developed around, you know, visual cues and audio cues kind of go into that as well. You could tell it was missing from certain versions.
I think design-wise, though, they knocked it out of the park. It all felt big budget for sure, like by design. Now, implementation's a whole other story with some of these ports, but design-wise, it felt very fine-tuned.
With that being said, let's get into my favorite portion of this show and what separates our podcast from others, the price and collectability aspect. Alright guys, because there's so many goddamn ports for this game, I think it's best if we go over system by system. We'll go over like how much it cost, then we'll discuss the pros and cons of that specific port, and that will segue us to the is it worth it question, which we'll keep separate. We'll kind of give our thoughts and feelings and the prices. I don't want to go in any particular order. I think we'll just start with cartridges because obviously it has a different set of pros and cons, right? I think we'll start with the Super Nintendo version.
Well, these are the ones that we played.
Yes, just for full transparency, we did not play the Game Gear version. We did not play the Game Boy version. Did not play the DOS version.
What
version.
We did play, Super Nintendo, Genesis, 32X, PlayStation 1,
Yep.
Jaguar CD, Saturn, 3DO. That's 8. Mm-hmm. Was that it?
In the arcade.
And the arcade on the Midway Treasures.
On the Xbox version, but honestly, they're all...
I'm like sitting here staring at this and being like, I don't even know what an R-Zone is, but...
Dude,
oh, God.
I will say
it's on it.
Really quick, just because it's hilarious to me, there are 2 different versions of the Tiger LCD game, but they go for about $30 to $80 loose, depending on which version you're getting. There's a 4-button and a 2-button, which is crazy for an LCD game, because they suck. You already know they suck. The Game Boy version, it's supposed to be pretty horrible. Plays kind of like Mortal Kombat. It's slow. There are big sprites, though. It's like $50 complete in the box if you're interested in that, which, honestly, as a guy who loves shitty ports, I'm probably going to be there. The arcade cabinet itself, fun enough. You can buy the JAMA for about $400, which is very reasonable in my opinion, honestly. But obviously, you don't get the cab. If you're looking for a complete cab, it's about $2,300, $2,500, which, not horrible for a full-size arcade that's super loud and awesome. Really quick, the DOS version is actually supposed to be pretty decent. It runs well. Again, we talked about how there's...
I am going to pause and say $50 is super inaccurate for that Game Boy.
Game Boy?
Yeah, like box and manual only sold for over 100.
I've seen it for
this app needs to update.
Yeah.
Woo!
It's also possible that like no complete ones are being sold for it to like actually update.
I've seen one for sale. It wasn't locally. It was like online. It was $350 asking.
Holy
so
shit.
You can ask whatever though, but just it's a Game Boy game. There's not a whole lot of boxes and manuals.
What's the cart, like $10?
$10.
Yeah. So, cart's not bad. I might check it out for how horrible it is, and I just love Primal Rage, man.
I watched some gameplay of it. It looks like a Game Boy fighting game. Put it that way.
I remember a couple years back I was watching on eBay the R-Zone. It was sealed, but it ended up going for like $120. I don't have it in me to buy an R-Zone game for $120. I really don't. Resident Evil or Primal Rage. Sorry, guys. But the DOS version is actually supposed to be pretty good. We referenced it earlier. There's 3 different versions. There's a 4 megabyte, 8 megabyte, and 16 megabyte version. It uses very similar audio. It looks great. I'm watching one on eBay right now. I think it's $20, $10 shipped, and it's really clean. So
it's a lot cheaper than the Amiga one.
Yeah, the Amiga one. Well, obviously you're paying the Amiga tax. Plus, it's the Amiga 1200, which is a beloved, computer for over there. It comes on 4-disc, interestingly enough, and you do have to disc swap between. So there's a lot of disc swapping with the Amiga version if you want.
Between fights and stuff, you can running around, you get the disc swap, which is classic Amiga.
I just wanted to cover that. We're not spending time on those. I just wanted to address the elephant in the room that there's so many different versions. Let's start with the Super Nintendo version. I think this is the one that, if you go online, look at Discourse, this is the cartridge version that most people prefer. However, I think all of us had a different opinion, but let's start with it because it's the Super Nintendo. Why not? Loose cart, you can get around $12, $13. I currently have a loose cart. Nate, you got a complete one, right?
I do.
Yeah, nice. It says it's going for about $50 on my app. That seems not bad for Super Nintendo complete. I'm about to check eBay.
Cartridge
on
is
that
more
shit,
15 to 20.
As I say, your shit's behind.
Yeah, you need to go check on eBay before we actually look at it.
Yeah.
Cart's like 15 to 20, and then complete in box I'm seeing 30 to 50, probably depending on condition. Which I think is
Super Nintendo
sealed.
I was about to say, if Super Nintendo was the one with the great manual, right? Mm-hmm. You'll want the manual for this one, y'all. Like, please check us out on Discord. I'm going to put it into YouTube, but we're going to put it everywhere. Like, it's hilarious. It does have different interior art. It's full color for the manual.
Color, yeah. It's the only full color one that we saw.
Yeah, which
I'll
is nice.
open my Genesis version at home and see if it's got color in it or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do like the interior and the guts. I like the actual Super Nintendo style box. But as far as the game itself...
That's about where I can stop being nice to this version.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, the game itself, it's rough, man. It's
dog shit.
Fucking ugly, honestly. It's so crazy because, like, every video I watched, every article I read, it was like, oh, the Super Nintendo version just slightly edges out the Genesis. Like, what fucking planet are you on, bro? Because...
I know it's repeating myself, but... Worst one I've ever seen. Yeah. I can't even think of another one that looks worse than this. It looks terrible.
I know, like, definitely... The graphic style, if you didn't do it right, would make it look worse. But like this one manages to somehow overachieve and looking terrible in almost every facet of way you could critique something. I think it's muddy. I think it's slow. I think it's stale.
I can't believe because we played the arcade one first, and then we played this one, and it was just such a difference. Like, you went from the best graphically.
I was like, all right,
to
let's
like
look
the
at this
Super
one.
Nintendo one next, and I was like, oh my god, can we be done with this?
I did it intentionally. I wanted to have the arcade version so we could see what it was supposed to look like. And that's what the fun thing with ports, right? Like, you want to get as close as possible, especially into a fighting game. But honestly, I just don't think the Genesis or the Super Nintendo version or the 32X version, cartridge-based systems, they just don't have enough horsepower for this game, man. A game that's known for its graphics, that's known for its speed, sound. These cartridge-based consoles.
Not cramming it onto something that small. I mean, when you talk about arcade cabinets, like, they have so much more board to work with.
Yep.
Something this small, and like even the systems like can't run it.
Dude, honestly, I genuinely lean Genesis. I don't know how anyone in the world would prefer the Super Nintendo version versus the Genesis one. Genesis one is playable. I feel like
the Genesis looked better than the 32X.
There's some things I feel like it did.
I do want to get on topic for the Super Nintendo one really quick. The first thing you're going to notice is these small-ass sprites, bro. Like, they're smaller than the Genesis version. They're smaller than the 32X version. They're just so damn small, man. And the frames, there's definitely a lack of frames on all cartridge version, but the Super Nintendo version, far and wide, the least amount of frames.
I think the stages are whack.
Look, I'm just going to be the one to say it. It's because people are obsessed with the Super Nintendo and can see no wrong with it.
I prefer the Super Nintendo over the Genesis, but there's no way in fuck I bought the Super Nintendo version first because I was like, oh, it's supposed to be better. But after playing it, hell no. I agree with you 100%, Barry.
Super Nintendo Super Nintendo tinted glasses is what that is.
It is for sure.
It's the same thing that people say, oh, 64 had some of the best graphics ever.
I'll put it this way.
Liar.
That Days Gone reality,
You're
bro.
A liar. Go over to the other Mandala reality.
Yeah,
I'll go ahead and just put my thoughts on the Super Nintendo. Like, I thankfully already own it. It'd be really hard for me to go purchase it after playing it. Like, I already own this one. So, and this is a game I truly love. I want to have every port of this game eventually within price of reason. But it'd be really hard for me to swallow the pill to go buy the Super Nintendo version after playing it. Like, it's not great, to be polite.
I also want to point out the Super Nintendo version is censored. So it is the 2.0 version, so you do get all 3 fatalities with the characters, but you don't get a 3rd fatality for Chaos because the piss fatality has been censored. It's been removed. I don't remember if we touched on it. Chaos basically pisses on the body with acid. Yeah, it's not in here because that's caused a big stir, and Nintendo can't have that, I guess. Also, another thing you're going to notice graphically is moving backgrounds are not in the Super Nintendo version. There's water that runs in other cartridge-based versions. Nintendo said, hold my beer, let's just stare at a painting. It's ugly, man. The biggest eyesore for me was when the character select screen, hovering over Chaos and just seeing how muddy like his torso to his hip was just ugly. I was like audible, ugh, like what is that?
Just a red blob.
I mean, I know we're going to move on to it here in a second, but I cannot believe that y'all out there kidding yourselves saying the Super Nintendo is the one you want when the Genesis Complete in box is as cheap as the Super Nintendo cart.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to yourself?
Real.
It's honestly like comparing like a NES to a Super Nintendo normally. Like it looks that glaringly bad to me.
It's terrible.
It's darker.
The ugliest Super Nintendo game I've ever seen.
Missing frames.
Straight up. I will.
And the reaction, and I don't even remember if we talked about this, but like the button input reaction was slower.
It was
It was noticeably slower.
Yeah, it's muddy. The whole presentation, like complete thoughts on it. It's the inferior version of what we played for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's the least. When you have a fucking 32X and a Jaguar CD you're fighting against, like, and you're losing, my God.
Yeah. In conclusion, Super Nintendo is nobody here's favorite at all.
I think all of us would agree it's the worst one that we played.
The best way I can summarize it is the negatives stand out more than any positives, because there's things about the audio I preferred over the Genesis version on this, but
Not worth it.
This will be the only time y'all ever hear me say this. Just buy the manual. Don't buy the box. Don't buy the cart. Just buy the manual.
no, I will say
That's true.
The extras with Super Nintendo I prefer. That's where the pleasantries stop. Like, this is not the version I could recommend at all. That being said, let's talk some Genesis. Nate, Mr. Genesis, we'll start with you. What are your feelings, thoughts on the Genesis version?
I mean, I guess with, you're comparing its biggest competition is going to be Super Nintendo. This one clearly stands out over the Super Nintendo. Now, if you're going versus the arcade, there's obviously some limitations. You have the smaller sprites again in this version. I think a lot of the graphics are honestly better on this version than they should be, frankly. And the frame rate was surprisingly good on the Genesis version. There's definitely more animations and more frames on this version than Super Nintendo, for sure. I feel like for a price point, it's a pretty decent. Now, the sound was like the one.
Even then, $5 for the cart, $20 complete.
Yeah. I was gonna say, how much?
$20. That's cheap as hell.
$20.
Like this. Hey, $20. This is like
paper box too.
This is paper box.
Paper box.
This is paper box.
Yep.
This feels more than a $20 game to me.
$20 worth it. Moving on.
Honestly, like no.
I mean, like to be fair, like the sound was not great, and I don't think that the Genesis ever excelled in the sound department.
That.
I was gonna,
but
go ahead,
like I said before, Sega does so much better in optimizing for arcade, and it was apparent in the gameplay and the graphics. I can forgive the sound to a point if I'm still having fun playing the game.
Exactly. The biggest thing you're gonna notice with the sound is the worshippers actually have audio. Like, when you hit them, they'll scream, they'll yell in the Genesis version. They don't in the Super Nintendo. My biggest negative for the sound for the Genesis version, anything high-pitched sounds like shit. So, like, the swooping and the thuds sounded better on Genesis, but anything high sounds like ass on
You always have that, like, tingy, ringing sound with Genesis sound chip. It's kind of what you're going to get. And this, like, if you know that going in, though, it's always going to be a knock when you're comparing a Super Nintendo versus Genesis game.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about games for me, though, is I don't put too much merit in the sound, because if it's bad, I can mute it.
Yep.
But if the graphics are bad, I can't like turn the graphics off and start playing the game.
Right. Sound's not a pivotal part of this game's like DNA and sound design.
Shit. I forgot about something hilarious about the Super Nintendo version. So we're talking about how much smoother and better this Genesis version is, right? It's funny, the Super Nintendo version has a turbo code that you can turn on to make it run faster. It still doesn't run as well as the Genesis, but you get no audio when it does that, which is insanity.
I can't believe it has to sacrifice the audio to even run faster.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
If that doesn't speak dividends to, like I said, the Genesis issue, it's got issues, but I'll take it every day of the week over the Super Nintendo version.
My honest thoughts on the Genesis version, it does feel like an arcade game brought home to Genesis. Like, I think honestly, mission accomplished with it. It's not a bad experience. It's a good experience in my opinion. And if $20 for a complete copy, like I feel like that's a definite worth it, dude.
You still get the small sprites, but they look better. They have more frames. It's a faster game. The audio's slower, but like you're saying, Barry, I'm not here to listen to the music. I'm here to play the game, and it plays better.
It's super functional.
Yeah.
And I think two humans could play each other and not feel like they're missing button inputs like on Super Nintendo, and you're not missing
Look at
frames.
this one. It looks decent, and it sold for $18.
Yeah, all day.
Y'all disrespect the Genesis version of this.
You do get a black and white manual with the Genesis. I'll throw that out there really quick.
Paper box you generally do.
You always do the paper box.
But again, like, come on, man. If you're that concerned about it, there's ways, there's ways around that. Like, it's a better version.
I think as far as your small sprite cartridge versions, this is the clear standout, and I would say overall this is a good port, like overall.
Yeah, for what it is.
The next one.
Next
not
one's
so much.
Our last cartridge version. It is Primal Rage on the 32X. So this version looks like loose. You're paying about
50.
Yeah, about $50. Complete in box looks like you're paying around $120.
Here's one that was 140.
Ooh. Yeah.
32X, man.
Yeah, you're going to pay that 32X tax on it. I mean, it's like you don't see these things pop up, so you're going to pay for it. Immediately, the first thing I noticed, it looks like a cleaner version of the Genesis version. It does have some extra frames built in, so like it does look slightly better, but for that price point, man...
I think it got some desaturation in the color, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because we had the same stage paused on the Genesis version, and we were looking back and forth, and it was noticeable.
Now, I will say, it works in some areas where you get that atmospheric perspective, where you can separate a foreground and a background, and if it gets too saturated on both levels, you have trouble, like, seeing where you are. And I think I might have had that issue in the Genesis one, where it was the underground level.
Armadon's level, yeah.
Yeah, it was really difficult to see, like, where I was. And this one felt more deliberate, not so much like the Super Nintendo one where they just like didn't give a fuck and fucked you over everywhere. Like this one deliberately felt like they did that to the background on purpose, and I liked it.
There was some shadowing and stuff in this version. I think my thoughts on this version, it is exactly what a 32X is. It's a ungodly, unfair first slight improvement over a Genesis.
It's a slightly souped up version that you need an entire expensive attachment for, and it is 100% not worth the price to get the same exact game that looks a little bit better.
Find me a 32X game that you're not going to say that to.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, it's a perfect 32X game. It's like it's way over the cost of what it should be to not really do a whole lot more. Like, it adds shadows, it adds some depth.
It's not worth it.
It has the background creatures too.
Generally plays pretty much like the normal Genesis version for 4 or 5 times the price.
If you're buying this 32X version of this game, you already know what you're about, and it's not going to sway you.
Correct.
It's not like it's not worth it, but you're still going to buy it.
Right.
Like that's the reality
that's
of
how
that.
I got it.
Right, yeah.
You know it's not worth that much money, but you're just like, I want it.
There are some things that are better. I think if price wasn't a thing, this is the best cartridge version, which is to be expected, right? Like you've got the pterodons that fly around. You've got better audio. Some of the backgrounds do look much nicer on the 32X version. They're not pixelated. It looks like an art piece instead of just squares. But again, I mean, what $100 difference for slightly better visuals and slightly better audio? Like, if you're gonna pay $140, there's better options to get this.
About like 6 copies of the Genesis version.
There's some consoles where people just, when they collect for it, they exist in the reality that none of the games are ever going to be worth the price, and I feel like 32X is one. Yeah. Where none of the games are going to be worth that price.
You don't mean Web of Shadows isn't worth like an arm and a leg and a kidney?
I mean, if it's available on something else,
that's the thing.
If it's available on something else, it's never worth it. Ever. You're just paying for the low print.
32X is the butt of jokes for a reason.
Don't forget the electric bill when you plug in all 3 big ass power bricks.
Goodness.
But no, in conclusion, I think it's probably the best cart if price wasn't an issue, but I can't recommend the 32X version. I really can't.
Yeah, even slightly, it's the best playable, but Genesis is the bang for your buck.
Yeah, it's still based on the 1.0 version too, which you think coming out almost a year later, they would have been like, oh, let's make this 2.0, but they said...
Sega gonna Sega.
Let's move on to the disc. Let's start with the 3DO just because it's funny.
Oh, man.
So the 3DO, you do get the large sprites, which is nice. So like right off the bat, it looks better than the 16-bit versions, which you'd expect. It's on a CD, right? I think the colors look really vivid. It is still missing frames, and it's still slightly choppy, but it looks, arm and a leg better than the 32X version. There is loading because it is on a disc. I didn't think the 3DO version was too egregious, though, in that regard.
As far as 3DO goes, it doesn't feel like your standard 3DO game where you're waiting 10 minutes to go make yourself a lemonade, come back, and it's still loading. It did the job.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say I can't... I forgot about the price. So like with the jewel case and the long box, you're looking at around $150, but I don't see
just the disc.
just the jewel case.
You don't find a whole. I mean, it's tough, man. It's 3DO. There's not a whole lot of them out there.
Because you got that big paper box too. If you want it,
that's what I mean. Complete. I can only find ones with the paper box. I can't find a price of just the jewel case.
There was a PAL jewel case floating out there somewhere, but
I mean, here's one. I guess
there's already enough variations. We're not doing that.
The disc, maybe with the case, you're looking at probably 50. No long box, 160 for just the disc.
It's not horrible, honestly.
These are asking prices though, so it's inaccurate.
So I mean, it's kind of like
you're looking at the same price as the 32X. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do that if you have a 3DO? Is my thing. Like you get
same deal.
Yeah, louder, prettier version with the big sprites. Comparing those two, like, come on, but it's also kind of not fair.
The sound,
3DO.
I will say, the sound
terrible
is something like.
Oh, I forgot about the crazy audio glitches with the static after you win. Was that 3DO?
Yeah,
that was also 3D. It's the one with the stuttering. Like
it was
the fish one. Yeah,
terrible.
That's the most egregious sound.
Okay, so maybe that's a big one over 3DO.
Honestly, like. There's times where it was startling after finishing a match where it start loading and it just make this crazy like almost like a short circuit noise which like and it was like every time it was like shit and you knew it was coming. It still scared the shit out of you. We talked about earlier with like give it a plus for having in between matches have a little character intros, which was really cool. It's surprising the arcade version didn't have it, but I don't think the price point justifies that enough on this version specifically.
No,
because you're comparing this to Jaguar CD Saturn, like 3DO ain't ever gonna win in those. Sorry, like it's not. Especially for the price point. This is a fairly cheap 3DO game for like something that's not.
Here's the thing: it's the same argument as 32X.
Exactly.
If you already collect 3DO, you know what you're getting into, and you know the games aren't fucking worth it.
Yeah, there's not.
Like that's just that's the reality that you live in as a collector with certain things, where you've dedicated to like buying that, and you're like, I know what I'm getting into. Like nobody buys 3DO and doesn't understand what they're doing.
Right.
That's why I don't have the 3DO version of this game.
That's why I don't buy 3DO.
Trying to get it before this episode, and I was like, man, fuck this.
Like, there's a very select few games that actually like truly,
I want
but
I don't really want to pay.
Now, why would you want to pay $150 for the 3DO version with video character introductions you can't even finish because it's stuttering so bad, and like earpiecing audio when you can pay $150 for the Saturn version that does everything properly and is probably the best version of this game.
So you want to talk about the Saturn version?
Let's just say buy the 3DO
straight to the Saturn version because like 3DO not worth that price.
$150 complete in the box for the Saturn version.
Yep.
And that's the thing. I feel like this is available too. So like if you are looking for it, you can find it. I do see this not like all the time, but I see it enough.
As far as Saturn games go, yeah, it's not like you're not going to see it. It's
disc is about the same, about 50 or 60.
Nice.
So,
and again, we touched on it previously when we were talking about the audio. The Saturn version's the only one with the Red Book audio, so like it's noticeable how much better the Saturn version sounds.
It's the standout for sound for sure.
Yeah. The biggest knock, it's beautiful too. You get the full size sprites. It's very fluid. It's very fast. The biggest knock on the Saturn version for me, which honestly, because everything else is so great, is that the loading times are a little long going into a match. But once you're in there, there's no loading. So if you're just patient and you want it to play better, which is what I care about, I'll wait 5 seconds. It doesn't bother me too much.
No,
I mean, even then, like, it's not even an egregious price for Saturn.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like on a whole other level of games when you've got Saturn games that are upwards of
especially
a couple
like
hundred. Like 150 is not really. That's on the low end of good Saturn games.
It's a good game. It's a really good port of a good game.
Mm-hmm.
Like honestly, so a lot of the Saturn games that are crazy ones, they're not even good. Like there's just like shitty games that there's just the scarcity. Like this is a solid.
Like outside of, and we haven't talked about Jaguar yet, but
we're only going to do it because we have to.
Yeah, I already think you guys know the answer to that. But outside of the Midway, like arcade version of it being a port in a collection, the Saturn one to me is the best running one, the best playable one, the best sounding one, the best looking one, and I think at that 150 price point, it's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I echo everything you just said.
Saturn is not a difficult console to find for. There's a bigger library for it than 3DO for comparing it to 3DO at the exact same price point. Like, I want to spend my $150 on the Saturn one. Because then I'm not bleeding my ears every single time I want to play it. It looks good. I have to wait 10 to 15 seconds between matches, but the entire time I'm playing it, it's smooth. I'm having a good time. I think this version of the game by itself as a collectible is 100% the most worth of all of the ones we played.
Agree.
100% agree. I think it's the one if you're looking for a Primal Rage by itself, collectible. I think it's got some upside. Being Saturn, I think it's ultimately the best version of what we played is a Saturn version. It's the closest to the arcade for sure.
Right. You want to play it, just get the Genesis one. But if you really enjoy this game and you want a good piece in your collection, this is the one to get.
Like without spoiling the Is It Worth It section too much, like this was my favorite.
It definitely
for sure.
I mean, we're in that section.
Yeah, it moved up the ladder for me
of...
after playing it for sure. Like I definitely want this version in my collection after playing it for sure.
It's a standout.
It's always kind of been there because I like Primal Rage. I'm like, yeah, but now I'm like, oh, this is like a great version of this game. Yeah, so hats off to the Saturn for knocking out of the park on this one.
Let's talk about the PlayStation version really quick. There are two different versions of the PlayStation version. You got your long box boy, and you got your standard jewel case boy.
I'm not even gonna lie, I completely forgot about that version.
Yeah, it's honestly it's kind of forgettable, man. I think it's the most readily available on disc because it is PlayStation. We all know the juggernaut that the PlayStation was. But it looks like a complete copy for the long box is going for around $115, $120 complete. You're gonna pay that long box tax. Mm-hmm. The standard jewel case version was honestly I've never personally seen in person. I'm having trouble finding one online unless it's PAL.
I can't remember ever seeing one myself.
I don't see an English one that's sold on eBay. Let me look for available.
I mean, jewel case, no buck.
Yeah, I don't see this one, to be fair.
Is this one of those rare instances where the jewel case is less common than
like Doom.
the long box? Yeah.
I don't think so.
But the price on it's cheaper than the long box.
My app says it's cheaper. And I don't see it, though, to be fair. But that's just like collectability side of it. Mm-hmm. As far as the gameplay goes, you're getting less superior out of than the Saturn. Graphically, I mean, I think it looks okay. It's fine. The loading is not as big as the issues people make it sound like it is online. People talk about how, oh, it's horrible, but it was quicker than the Saturn version, honestly.
It's not as bad as like Children of Atom or other fighting games on PS1.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
You still get the large sprites.
It's playable. It's playable. Yeah. It looks okay. I got my Trump hands out here.
It's playable.
It's playable. It looks okay. But the load times are rough.
Yeah.
And then if I don't want to spend $150 on the Saturn version, okay, fair. But just still buy the Genesis one.
Yeah, honestly.
Like, even, I don't know, if you're already spending, how much was it, long box?
120-ish.
If you're already spending $120, just get the Saturn one. I don't know. I mean, unless you're a strictly PlayStation collector and you never intend on branching outside of that and there's nothing else on the Saturn that you want. Like, you're like, I'm never going to collect that console. Totally fair. I'm not going to ask you to spend $30 extra for a game that you're never going to play on other console.
Bryan made a point.
But just buy the Genesis one.
I think Bryan made a point earlier about this game having some known programming and bug issues and stuff, though. Like, it needs to be said, if you're playing on a PS1, you're going to have
no music when you're fighting.
That's true.
There's bugs that take you to versus when you're playing arcade. If you pick certain characters that fight each other at certain times.
I mean, if you really want to be like true to original hardware, I suppose that's a problem. But PS3s are so accessible, and every single one plays PlayStation 1 games.
Yeah, it's something worth noting though. If you're a purist,
if you're a PlayStation guy, I think it's a decent port. But there's superior versions for just slightly a couple more bucks.
That's the thing.
It's not the most egregious one.
What is it, dude?
Certainly
it's not the most egregious.
Certainly not.
And we were talking about it when we played, but I'm just like, PlayStation ports are notorious for having horrible load times. Mm-hmm. But people still want them. Like Chrono Trigger, I was talking about some of the Final Fantasy ports. They just have terrible load times, but people still do want them. So I can see, especially it being a long box too. Yeah, it has a little bit of a more of a facet to it as a collectible.
I think it's a cool collectible, honestly, in the long box. I think the art, just seeing like the ape doing the uppercut in the long box, aesthetically it looks better to me. But I mean, again,
it had a really cool.
We're comparing ports here, man. Give me that.
Yeah.
Saturn version stuff.
I will quickly shout out one of the inserts that comes with the PlayStation long box one that Bryan has. There's an ad for the CD soundtrack in the back, and it's got Blizzard with like a boombox and shades, and it's hard as fuck. So it made me like audible chuckle out of me. So, but yeah, PlayStation 1's okay. I think that's the best way to say it. There's better. There's way worse. It's I think it's right there in the middle, upper middle of all these, honestly.
Well, Barry, you mentioned it about being egregious. The most egregious version, let's move on to that. It is the Atari...
We already did. That was Super Nintendo.
I don't know, man.
There's only one argument for. Go ahead.
I would say the Super Nintendo version is probably the shittiest, but as far as price point, if we're gonna talk Atari Jaguar CD costing about $500 for this turd, bro.
It's got nothing to do with the game.
No, it's because the system. We all know there's only 13 games on the system, right? The system itself is expensive.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
I want to pull it up real quick while you're mentioning it.
Even the disc itself loose about $200. So like, full disclosure, this is my least favorite disc-based version of this game. Even over the PlayStation with its audio issues, I don't care. And when you throw that price on, if they were all the same price, I would still be like, ew, this is a gross version.
Well, the shocking thing with this one to me, the first thing that stood out is it's the small sprites on a CD.
Yep.
That's insane. Like, even with the problems the 3DO version had, it still looked like the CD-based version. It looked closer to the arcade. To this one, it's like you almost get comparable to the 32X, honestly.
13 plus 14 if you count the missed demo.
Jeez.
But there's no pricing on that, so.
The thing with this Jaguar version, like, technically it does have more frames than the 3DO, but you can't really tell because it doesn't run as well. I'm talking 3DO too.
It's one of those
because the sprites are smaller. You know what I mean? That's why it technically looks like there's more frames, but it doesn't run smoother.
Yeah, I mean, I understand like the reasoning behind Jaguar CD games being expensive because the consoles did not sell, the games did not sell, the library is non-existent because they just gave up on it so fast. So like, I understand it in the same concept of like Virtual Boy, but don't ask me to spend $300 on a game that's not exclusive to that console. Dragon's Lair is on another one. Baldi's is on another one, but like...
There's not a whole lot that's like, there's no system seller for it, for sure.
No. And Primal Rage is the second most expensive game out of all of those. So...
It's one of those things.
I guess if you want to spend that much money to tout a complete collection,
there's better games and there's better ways, dude. Like, this is the shittiest version just because of the price point and because of performance. Like, that's the thing. So the Saturn, you're gonna pay a little more than the PlayStation, but look how much better a version it is. If we're comparing this to probably its competition, 3DO, like,
it's hard for me to compare this one to the other CD ones when you have it doesn't look like the other CD ones. It looks like the cartridge ones. So if you're compared to that, it's like certainly like, thank God the Super Nintendo one looks so fucking bad because this one's like performs a little better. But
I want to be nice and say one good thing about the Jaguar version. It does have a tug of war mode where you have like one health bar and it goes back and forth. But if that's worth an extra $300 to you, by all means, I'm not your financial advisor, but I can tell you for me, it's not.
I think Barry has said it multiple times on this episode, but like, you know what you're getting into if you're buying Jaguar CD games, and that's really the only way. Like, when you're out of other shit to do, well, I guess I'll go buy fucking Primal Rage on Jaguar CD. But like, even if you're just emulating it, like, this is not the one. Like
it's so hard for me, you know, especially if we do these "Is It Worth It" episodes so much more often. It's so hard for me to say some games are worth it outside of even playing them, like just taking a look at it. And I think that this is not a console that a new time collector is going for.
Yeah.
Ever.
No.
Someone who's getting into game collecting for the first time and is really investing into it and being like, this is something I really want to do. Y'all ain't buying no damn Jaguar CD. You're just not.
It's part of the Atari Blood Pact where you have to shoot yourself in the foot and make horrible decisions.
There's Atari.
I
mean,
I would never in my entire lifetime ever choose that.
There's hardcore Atari fans that don't give a fuck about the Jaguar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't even like...
Well, it killed the
And even then, you have no new blood coming up here being like, no. I want to buy all the... Why? You don't want to buy any Atari games. Stop lying to yourself.
Weird observation, for them having like a Game Gear port and a Game Boy port, don't you think they would have had a Lynx port of this game? I mean, Atari, just kind of a weird observation.
It's too expensive to make for the Jaguar.
I guess, man. Atari I don't get it.
Atari gone Atari.
Because the Game Gear version is supposed to be decent.
Like, I can understand during the time that they made this game that they want to make it everywhere so anybody can play it at any point in time. And that's like a very time period type thing.
Right.
For sure.
As collecting now, there's absolutely no reason that you should be buying it on any of these.
Yeah.
Outside of the reasoning of, I have money to afford the very expensive things, the very niche things, and that's what I want.
Right.
Like, I don't know, like, I guess it's a question for you guys, like, as Primal Rage, like, dedicated fans. because you grew up with it, right? It's a nostalgic piece for you.
100%.
You enjoy game collecting. Are you going to buy the Jaguar CD version?
I would have to have a lot of shit not on my list left.
That's what I mean.
Well, honestly, when I picked this episode, there was a couple I don't own. And I was like, I want all these. Like, I love collecting just different parts of the same game. It's fun. I know it's stupid, look. But that's when you look at yourself in the mirror and say, at what price point is this worth it? I have a Jaguar. I don't have a Jaguar CD, so I don't want to buy a game for something that I can't dust off once every 10 years and play. But, like, man, how the fuck do you justify that price point for this Atari Jaguar CD version?
I mean, there's a difference, brother. Like, do I want a nice, big, giant, huge house with 20,000 rooms? Yeah, but, like, I'm not buying that.
When you put it in those terms, like, I want the Jaguar CD version, but I'm not buying that. You know?
No, like that's just reality.
It's the thing that I have to find thrifting for $3. I'm like, oh my god, look what I just found.
That's like a once in a lifetime thing.
Doesn't happen anymore. You know what I mean? Or like so.
Like you're gonna for you to actively want this game and then actively search intending to buy this game, you are already ready to spend $500.
Right. What's $500 at that point?
Right.
You a sick fuck.
I mean, if you got the money and you want to buy it, like, you can, go ahead and donate to the Collecti-Bros podcast instead.
Yeah, dude.
No shaming anybody who's intending to buy it, but I'm just, we always put it in the perspective of, like, lower middle class.
Right.
We ain't rich out here by any fucking means.
Oh, no. With that being said, sliding into the Is It Worth It section, I'm going to throw a curveball at all y'all out there listening. For me personally, the best version of this game that they played, bar none. Saturn was great, but you know what I think the best version was?
Don't say something stupid.
Midway Arcade Treasures 2 on Xbox. And guess what? You know how much this fucker goes for? Mine has a $4 sticker on it. I know that.
I only did not include that in our thing because of it being a collection.
Right.
It is technically the only way to play the arcade version, though.
Correct. And with that being said, everyone shits on this version specifically because I don't remember if we talked about it or not. The arcade version has so much copyright protection in it that like it's impossible to port. So if you go out there and try to sail the high seas for this game, it's impossible to get an arcade perfect version of this game. This Midway Arcade Treasures Collection 2 is the closest you can get.
What consoles is that on?
It is on PS2, GameCube, and Xbox.
Okay.
And, you know what? Honestly, when we were playing it, I didn't experience any of the issues. So, like, the built-in copy protections, the blood changes color, you randomly fall when you're walking, you can't
I don't remember that happening.
We didn't happen.
Experience any of that shit. And we played it for good.
We had one debatable blood spot that may have changed color that none of us could all three agree on if it happened or not. Like,
if that's the worst thing you got to worry about, especially at this price point, come on, man.
GameCube says it's like $20 if that. It's on PSP.
Cheap ass GameCube.
Or wait, no, that one's not. I'm sorry, not on PSP. Midway Treasures 2 on PlayStation 2 is like $15. Xbox is the cheapest one.
Bro.
And it looked damn good on the Xbox.
It looks great, yeah.
Look, man, all I'm saying is y'all, I mean, as a guy who wants all these ports, right? If I want to play this game and dust it off, easily accessible 2 players on original Xbox, PlayStation, and GameCube, this is your best bet just for playing it. Hands down, no questions asked, bar none. I think it's a great deal. You get other games too, like shit.
And they're good games. So it's like
from a gameplay standpoint, why wouldn't you do this? I need someone to tell me an argument why you would, from a gameplay. But obviously, collecting is a different thing. Like, I want every version of this game. You want your specific console library, whatever. I get that. I'm not telling you what to do. If you want to go out there, experience this game, and play it for fun on the cheap, this is hands down the best option. No questions asked.
Do you know if this is backwards compatible with the 360 or the One?
I don't
or the X?
think it is.
Okay.
I don't believe it is. I could be wrong on that.
The only reason I see anybody saying I don't want that version is because you don't have a GameCube, you don't have a PS2, or you don't have an Xbox. But if you don't have one of those 3 consoles, how in the hell are you going to have a Saturn or a Genesis or a Super Nintendo?
Unless you're just going in order, then you're a psychopath.
Unless you're a cabinet collector and you have a fucking Primal Rage cabinet.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Like,
yeah.
If you don't have one of those 3, it's highly likely that like you don't have some of the older ones. I mean, some people are just strictly cartridge collectors, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, sure. It comes down to a collection of collecting instead of playing. I decided to choose my words carefully. If you just want to play this game, this is hands down your best option. It's the cheapest. It's the best version. I know it's kind of a cheat code answer, but for me, like, is that version worth it? Yes, it's worth the price, worth the collectability. It's worth playing. It's my favorite version. I think it's accessible. I think most people have at least one of those consoles. If you're a Nintendo guy, you got a GameCube. Everybody has a fucking PS2.
I always have to think that, like, when I meet, like, game collectors, I've never met a game collector who only collects one console. Right. Ever.
Right.
It's pretty rare.
Ever. As, like, a self-touted, like, I'm a video game collector, but I only collect for Nintendo DS.
Right.
You don't. I'm sorry. Yeah. You like playing games and you have other consoles.
I'll even throw an extra bone this one's way. This game, it is kind of murky who has the rights to it, right? It's like a Warner. Is it Warner Brothers?
Warner's got the rights, yeah. They bought Midway.
And the way they're looking right now, like this game might never come out again.
Well,
so, like,
Warner want to go over here playing around with this stupid ass Suicide Squad kills the Justice League garbage
company, bro.
Rumors are up for sale right now, so like it
killed the Warner Brothers, bro.
This might be the last time Primal Rage gets released on anything. This version, you know what I mean? So like.
That's true. It is.
Could make it a little more collectible later.
I don't know. I got a feeling if they're up for sale, someone will snatch them up just for the rights for DC.
Someone's buying them all Kombat and Batman and shit.
Right.
Primal Rage, rest in peace, brother. Pour one out.
I mean, we can't. I mean, who's to say? You know, I said we'd never see Soul Reaver, and that's possibly quite here out on the horizon. Even though I begged and already accepted that never happened.
Yeah. All I'm saying is if you want to play it, I think that's hands down, no questions asked, bar none, your best option. Now, if we're talking collectibles and you're going to spend and get a specific SKU of this game, I'm going to go ahead and say it, man. I know it's a little pricier than some of them. That Saturn version is nice. It's all around a great package. It's the closest you're going to get to the arcade without getting the PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube version. I really enjoyed my time with that Saturn version, man. Yep. So overall, is it worth it?
I think if you're... The only two I can say, yeah, Genesis is worth it in my opinion.
Agree.
I think Saturn's worth it. I think PlayStation you could maybe make an argument for, but at the same time, everything else is they're like completely below that where it's a maybe or no. Like,
yeah, I agree.
Then there's a couple maybes in there. I think as far as no, Super Nintendo's a hell no. Like, it's not even worth it for a collectability aspect to me when it's on the system. You know, it's competition's console for cheaper and better. I think the Jaguar, whatever. I think the really two you can only make an argument for, yeah, it's worth it, is Saturn and Genesis, honestly. Everything else is kind of like, that's really, if you're trying to collect that system, but like, I can't think of a worse example of a game than the Super Nintendo version. I really just want to get that across. Like, don't buy it. It's not worth it.
If you don't have any of these consoles and you want to buy one version of Primal Rage, and you have to buy the console too, it's probably going to be PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm pretty sure PlayStation 2s are cheaper than Xboxes and GameCubes at this point.
Yeah.
GameCube discs are notoriously fucked, so just like don't get those. Mm-hmm. Just get a little PlayStation. There's 20,000 million of them out there, and get your little arcade treasures and play your game. And that's going to be like the cheapest option all around.
And the best playing. It's really hard to debate against that. I know this is boring for a podcast not to debate you, Nate, but I pretty much agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That being said, yes, it's worth it. And also know it's worth it based on which system you buy. But overall, man, I love this game. I'm glad we got to do this one.
Pouring out for Primal Rage 2, brother.
For sure. Barry, what's next?
All right. We're going to do our first publisher/developer special. Because I haven't necessarily... I'm not saying all of them are publisher specials and all of them are developer specials, and sometimes they do both.
Yeah.
So, I want to talk about all of the Working Designs games.
Nice.
We did one this year, which is Vanguard Bandits, but I think Working Designs is a developer that I'm sad is gone, but I want to showcase some of their games because they have very, very collectible and expensive games. And we're going to talk about it.
Nice. They're special.
It'll be a fun one. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Whichever device/platform you listen to us on. Again, don't forget to stay subscribed or to currently subscribe to stay updated on newest episodes and release. Also, check out the Discord where we have that available as well. Thank you for listening, each and every one of you. We appreciate you guys dearly. Have a good one. Later. Break that ceiling. Stay true, gamers.